to start us off, but this is intended to be an open-ended discussion. So I'm hoping this will just be a conversation among veterans of the top-to-bottom review, and then another study that was inspired by the top-to-bottom review in Ohio called EVEREST. The top-to-bottom review was the first official opportunity that technologists were given to get privileged access to a voting system, including looking at the source code and with the promise of being allowed to publish results unedited and without the approval of the vendors. And that was a hugely important opportunity. So I got a call from David Wagner, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, who was leading the source code review of the various systems in California. And he asked me if I would be interested in leading one of the specific systems review, coming to Berkeley, sitting in a lab over the summer, and leading a team of graduate students who would examine the source code, in my case, for the Sequoia voting system. And I thought about this a lot. I said, well, you know, what if we don't find anything? And that was my biggest concern. You know, what will, you know, we know there are things wrong with these systems, we know there are problems, but they're giving us only, you know, they're giving us only something like 8 weeks, and we have to, including the time required to write a report. What if that's not enough time to find all the vulnerabilities? And, you know, David said, well, you know we're going to find plenty of vulnerabilities. And, you know, I said, yeah, but what if we don't? And, you know, then we'll have this, experts have looked at this system and not found anything. What do we conclude from that? And you know, and that's a significant risk. Now, I was convinced after a while that it was very likely that we would find interesting things. There would be interesting things to say. And so I agreed to take the risk. I think today, if we were holding this, systems have gotten a little bit better. And it might not be sufficient time to do a comprehensive review of a voting system in which you'd be able to say, okay, here are some top-level things that need to be fixed. But at the time, these were early systems. We knew they had been rushed into production. We thought it was, you know, likely that there would be things that we would find. Almost immediately after we published our report, I said, thank God I get to retire from election systems. I've done all the work I'm ever going to do on this. And I got a call from the Secretary of State of Ohio saying, oh, we really loved the California top-to-bottom review, but that didn't include all of the voting systems used in Ohio. Why don't you do it again? In this case, I led a team that looked at the ES&S hardware that was used in Ohio. But I had the advantage that we learned from some of the mistakes we made in setting up the top-to-bottom review. We got access to all the hardware as well as the software in our lab for testing. That was helpful. And we also realized that between these two studies, we were covering about 90% of the voters in the country. We were reviewing the election equipment that they were using. And so just 2 states were enough to examine the election systems used by the overwhelming majority of American voters.
If I could jump in there. So I also worked on both of these studies, and I was then from Ohio. But I need to flag for everyone what some very significant differences were between the Secretary of State.
Oh, and to introduce yourself, by the way.
I'm Candace Hoke. I was a law professor and head of the Center for Election Integrity at Cleveland State University, also the public monitor of Cuyahoga election reform. We ran lots of different kinds of technical, rather path-breaking technical evaluations of elections and election equipment. which is why the Secretary of State's Office of California called us, and we were thrilled. But because I was working with the Secretary of State's Office of Ohio in the midst of, as well as after the TTBR, there were some distinctive differences in expectations that I want to flag for you because they are almost shocking and I'm not even sure you knew. So the Secretary of State in Ohio wanted the complete final edit of all scientific reports, but also to keep the scientists' names on them so that they, and then to put an NDA on all the scientists so that they could not reveal that anything had been changed, and she could have these reports come out exactly the way she wanted.
Yeah, and we didn't go for that.
And I was sort of the go-between and the legal rep to try to make sure.
We lost months of working time because of that.
Right. The second thing, though, that she wanted was she did not want any vulnerability reported whatsoever unless there was a quick and complete fix, mitigation. And therefore, but that also was not going to be reported to the public. So just think of what these reports would have looked like. Everything that was wrong, we found, and we can fix them. You can trust your elections, go forth and be happy. And the Secretary of State's office in Ohio did not like that I stuck up for the scholars, and as Matt knows, I ended up being fired just as the report or the study went into effect because I was insufficiently loyal. So,
but you fought for us, and we were so grateful because the ES&S project.
You need to introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Sandy Clark, and I was a grad student under Matt, and one of the people that worked on the Everest project on the Ohio one, and it took so long for the negotiations, and Matt wouldn't let us sign anything until we'd gotten the right to publish, and every single vulnerability we found. We agreed to put the actual POC exploit in an appendix that just went to the election officials, but every single thing we found we published. But we lost 12 weeks of time that we were going to have to work, and we had 700,000 lines of code. The initial ballot design systems all the way up to the scanners and the tally machines. And so we couldn't do an actual security audit of this stuff. We basically said, okay, if I'm a poll worker and I get these things dropped off in my driveway 3 days before the election, how do I get my person elected? And everything we thought of worked. Every single, and this, it's unbelievable because we're not very good. We're not lead hacksaws. We were apprentice professors. And it didn't matter. Everything we thought of, oh, can I put my own malware on this? Can I get that malware to go back and reinfect the systems that are going to create the next election? Everything worked.
So may I?
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Deirdre Mulligan. I'm a professor at Berkeley in the School of Information. At the time of the top to bottom review, I was a professor at the law school, so I'm a lawyer by training. And I want to do two things. I want to step back. One, because of the time we're in when research funding is so under assault, that I think it's important to acknowledge that the National Science Foundation had funded a center, Accurate, which several of us were part of, to look at, in an interdisciplinary way, the accuracy, security, reliability, integrity, privacy of voting systems and of electronic voting systems. And that meant that when Secretary Bowen was looking for people to do this work, there was an interdisciplinary group of people who were really already working together and who were very invested in doing this work. And that research investment yielded things like software independence, risk limiting audits, and other things that have been an enormous benefit to the public across the country. And I just want to emphasize the importance of public investment in research. Second, Secretary Bowen kind of downplayed. It was like a rather like, and then I did this, and then I did this, and I just want to like put a real marker down that what she did was visionary, right? We have not had, think about everything in state, federal, local government that is being automated today. All of the automated decision-making systems, all of the generative AI, all of the technology that is being brought into public services that is not getting one whiff of the kind of scrutiny. We don't have standards for much of it. We do not have independent teams. We do not have contracts with universities and city, state, or federal governments that allow people to come in and do the sort of tough review that's required if we both want trustworthy systems, and as Matt, I think, really put a very fine point on it, systems that the public will trust. And I just want to say that there has never been a more important time to hold up this visionary work and to say this is the model that we need to be adopted if we actually want to make sure that we get technology that serves public purpose and that people really want to trust. And so I want to thank you and also thank the National Science Foundation for viewing the role of research as being delivering big things for the public. So I just wanted to put those down.
I would definitely agree on that, in case it wasn't clear, Deborah Bowen's project, the TTBR, had total integrity. I mean, the integrity of the scientific product was number one. It had to be trustworthy by the public and by her, and she wasn't going to fiddle in it. Think about that from a political standpoint, because there's so many political leaders who would want to make sure the product meets their political goals. So that's something else we need to recognize as being extremely important as a standard for going forward for anyone else who wants to carry forth this work. But I'd also like to clarify something else. The Texas people, I just praise you for what you were doing. But I have to say, when this work was beginning, the world was different in ways you would not even conceive of. And I want to clarify what some of those ways were. Election officials nationwide believed that and had been told and taught that election machinery, and that was their terminology, election machinery was not computers, and that computer science and computer security had nothing to do with their election machinery. Yeah. And so all these people who were clamoring about the problems from a computer security standpoint didn't understand elections, all the steps that the election officials took to make sure that the elections would be secure and accurate. And so there were these two different worlds, and they had two different sets of nomenclature and expectations, and so the vendors, to a great extent, had already, they were in charge of training election officials to a great extent. NASED, the National Association of Election Directors at the time, was very close with the vendors. They were in charge of the certification standards, the testing labs, and all of the reports were secret at the time that the TTBR was convened. So these worlds were, you can't imagine what it was like to talk to election officials at high levels and low, and to hear them say that computer science had nothing to say about elections. That was valuable. Is that true?
Yeah.
That's the way you feel? So,
and there's an additional thing that went along with that, which was the Help America Vote Act, which gave a federally funded mandate that to the states, they got money to buy new machines. So all of a sudden, these two worlds were clashing in a cascade.
Right.
And you had a perfect storm, right? The vendor contracts, right, as a lawyer, of course, looking at the contracts, of course, no reverse engineering, but the only testing you're allowed to do is logic and accuracy testing. No accessibility testing, no security testing, no red team testing, no testing of any sort. No allowing other people to look at the system documentation, to look at the training materials, et cetera, right? And today, right, I bet if we look at contracts again, we would see similar sets of limitations on how people can examine this technology.
But I want to point out that the, computerization of voting systems is a, game changer about how you have to examine them. We now know we have to acknowledge that these things are never going to be perfect. But in order to do that, we have to start by acknowledging that these are computers, right? That every part of this is a computer running software that is no better or worse necessarily than the software that you get a new security patch for every month, and that a new vulnerability gets found on any platform we use.
So
the shrewdest thing that's been done in election security that I'm aware of, and there was a great talk on this last year here from the Dutch election officials. The Dutch hacker that we all know, Hoke, coined the term when the Netherlands government was looking at using touchscreen voting machines, coined the term voting computers instead of voting machines. And that caught on, and that led to an understanding that there was an inherent vulnerability in here. That term has caught on less in the United States than it has in Western parts of Europe. But it's a very, very important distinction, and that term deserves more currency.
And even more important to focus, because the other machines pre-electronic lasted for 50, 60, whatever years, the ones that you would stick a pin in or something like that. When these new machines were bought, no one thought about the fact that a computer has to be updated. There are things, things change in the whole ecosystem that you're connected to, and the back-end system that's making the ballots and the one that's doing the tallying are just desktop PCs. These things need updating. So where were the provisions when the command went out to upgrade for the states to buy electronic machines? Where was the provision to maintain and upgrade? The ones we looked at are running Windows CE, they're running Windows 2000, they're running a very early version of Linux, and I would wager none of them have been changed since then, and that was, what, 2012?
I was leading one of the documentation reviews, and our system was the Diebold system, the creme de la creme. But just to show you some of the documentation errors, all of these DREs and even the election management system came with, as you can imagine, administrative passwords already in, which were supposed to be changed. Well, in Cuyahoga County, when we did an evaluation of our failed election, we discovered that the admin passwords all over the system had not been changed. And we flagged it and then insisted that they be changed before the next election. Then we reviewed it again, we found they had not been changed. And then when I worked on the TTBR and I was able to find the documentation, lo and behold, the documentation for how to change the password did not work. And when I checked back at Cuyahoga County, they did say, yes, that was why we couldn't change our passwords, because how they told us to change the admin password was an error. Can you believe that? So,
well, we also found one, just by running strings on it, that they'd hard-coded a password, and the comment said, we hard-coded this so that hackers couldn't use it.
There are two big lessons, I think, for folks who care about the integrity of public systems that I took away, in addition to the need for testing and evaluation. And one, Matt and David flagged earlier, and we're going to hear from Ron Rivest later, but moving away from framing the problem of we need secure software to framing it, sorry, it's very loud, that we need secure, reliable, private, fair, accurate elections, despite the fact that software is buggy and might be malicious. Changes the envelope of what we're evaluating.
Right.
And it also really emphasizes architecture, not just code. And I think that was an incredibly important takeaway that should shape the way we approach all systems. And the second, this didn't come up too much, but there were, right, we have the HAVA money coming out. We've had this horrendous experience in the 2000 election. The disability community, the civil rights community very much wanted upgraded software yesterday. And the security, the privacy, the accuracy folks who'd been studying voting systems had not been talking all that much to the civil rights and the accessibility communities that also wanted robust software, but they were very focused on other attributes. And when we think about designing our systems, we need to be accounting for all of the values that have to be supported and reflected in them, because otherwise people end up being pitted against each other by vendor choices about what to prefer.
Should we open for questions?
Let's see. Just a couple other background things. You can consider voting in the United States as a huge distributive system, because it's the different states, either Secretary of State or Lieutenant Governor, that decide who are the vendors that are going to have the right to sell. But it's the various precincts that mix and match from the vendors they're allowed to buy from. And then it's the counties themselves that put the elections on. So there's not a single county in the U.S. that runs like any other county in the U.S. And so, yeah. So even trying to train poll workers on how to use things, or trying to, when they gave us all this, they just dumped everything on us and said, okay, now prove that we're insecure. We tried for about 2 weeks, right, to even design our own ballot, but we could not figure out from the documentation how somebody actually would create a ballot to run an election. So we had to go back to the vendors, and apparently most of the counties would actually have the vendors design their ballots for them. Where's the integrity, or how do you validate the integrity of that? And when you're talking about a touchscreen device, a little tiny bit of miscalibration, and it might look like you're voting for the person you're not, but the actual ballot that's counted will be for something else.
Yeah, so we had the great advantage of being early on this, so all the low-hanging fruit was right there for us to take.
Yeah.
And what I remember in both the TTBR and the Everest studies was a mad dash of literally spending 48 straight hours in the lab,
Yeah.
typing in our report, and realizing our findings were limited by our typing speed.
Yeah.
We literally did not have time to write down everything we found,
Right.
and get it edited, and that was sobering. Now today, the stupid bugs that were all there and nobody had noticed because no one was allowed to look are mostly gone, right? They're probably shipping more robust systems today than they were in 2007, though we don't really know.
No, think shell shock.
No one has done this, since then. But I think it's possible.
Well, no, we got backward compatibility.
Yeah,
No way.
right.
No.
Well, it's possible that the dumb bugs have been fixed, but that leaves the subtle bugs, right? And those are the ones that are going to take less than, that are going to possibly take more than a group of grad students with nothing better to do over the summer and 8 weeks locked in a room. We might not find those, right? But someone who's actually interested in compromising an election isn't nearly as constrained as we were. So, this chase the last bug method
Approach, yeah.
is essentially obsolete.
Yeah.
At this point.
But if you had a couple million and you wanted to get your person elected, where's the best return on your investment? Advertising? No. Hire some kids in Eastern Europe.
Right. If you're not on the microphone, you're not asking your question.
Excuse me.
So I'm really struck by the fact that we are in a vendor capture system. Really what I've been hearing is that it's very dependent on what the vendors are willing to do. And my sense is between 2007 and now, we're still working with off-the-rack computers that are tweaked a little bit to as quickly as possible to get them out into the market. Is there any place, and I think of the contrast, when we decided to send a man to the moon, we started from the ground up and we built a completely safe system. Let's not go into the privatization now. But at least there, the goal was we will get the best and the brightest and we will build something from the beginning to the end that we know we control and we believe is as safe and excellent as we can make it. You contrast that to how we run our elections, and it's just mind-boggling. Is there any place where the government started, or whomever started, with a blank page and said, this is what we need to do to build a reliable system? We are building a reliable election system from the ground up that is not vendor-driven, that is voter and administration-driven. Does that happen anywhere in the world?
So you know, I mean, LA tried to do that. There were some systems that were
Norway,
you know, built with a lot of input from specific election officials for specific places. One of the problems with these systems that are designed for individual places is there isn't a big enough market to make it worth productizing them if they've been customized to work. You know, this works great in LA County, but it doesn't meet the needs of anyone else in the country. So, you know, I think we're going to be stuck for a little while with suboptimal systems. And that's one of the reasons that the architecture of software independence is so important, because we're never going to be able to get that highly reliable. The highly reliable goal is probably unachievable given the requirements for elections. So I think.
But even with something like formal verification on the code, if that code gets attached on some machine that wasn't part of the formal verification, that was outside of the assumptions of whatever you formally verified, you have no guarantee of security at that point. You've completely broken your model.
So I'm going to cut us off with one more question, because we're eating into the time when Ron is going to tell us how to do it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, I agree software independence is critically important, and I think that's a major part of why it was included in the new voluntary voting system guidelines. Do you view, obviously standards are an imperfect process, but do you view, you know, the VVSG 2.0 and forward and the new systems that are being certified to that as manifestly better than the systems you were analyzing 20 years ago?
Are you going to go on the record?
I mean, everything's better than what we were looking at in 2007. I mean, that's but you know, the question is not whether we've improved. Of course we've improved. The question is whether or not we have both trustworthy and trustable elections, right? And I think software independence makes the burden on the hardware and software less stringent, and that's what you know, that makes it more achievable. So it's less, you know, it's less that the systems have improved and more that our architectural model for them has improved. But thanks everybody, and now we get to hear about software independence.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. For all of the work that you have done.